Imagine living in a country where a single political decision could determine whether your family would eat or starve, where criticizing the government could destroy your future, where millions of people disappeared into prisons, labor camps, or famine, and speaking about it could make you the next victim. Now imagine that this was happening not during a medieval dictatorship, but in one of the largest nations on Earth during the 20th century. At the height of the Cold War, while the world focused on the nuclear rivalry between Washington and Moscow, another story was unfolding inside communist China. It was a story of power, a story of ideology, and a story of humans suffering on a scale that remains difficult to comprehend. At the center of it all stood one man, Mao Zedong. To his supporters, Mao was a revolutionary who unified China after decades of civil war and foreign invasion. To his critics, he became one of the most destructive political leaders in modern history. His rule transformed China, but it also unleashed policies that led to some of the deadliest man-made disasters ever recorded. And for decades, much of the outside world struggled to understand what was really happening behind China's closed borders. To understand Mao's rise, we must first understand the world he inherited. When the Chinese Communist Party seized power in 1949, China was exhausted. Years of Japanese occupation, civil war, political instability, and economic collapse had left the country devastated. Entire regions were impoverished. Infrastructure was damaged. Millions had already died from decades of conflict. For many Chinese citizens, almost any form of stability seemed preferable to endless chaos. Mao promised something revolutionary: a new China, a powerful China, a united China. His message resonated across the country. Millions believed they were witnessing the birth of a stronger future. At first, many observers around the world viewed communist China as a rising force that might eventually become a dominant player in international politics. American policymakers watched carefully. The victory of the Chinese Communist Party dramatically altered the balance of power in Asia. Suddenly, the world's most populous nation had joined the communist camp. In Washington, concerns grew immediately. Would China become a permanent partner of the Soviet Union? Would communist influence spread further throughout Asia? Would American allies in the Pacific face increasing pressure? These questions became central to Cold War strategy. But while foreign governments focused on geopolitical consequences, Mao was focused on something else: control, absolute control. Like many revolutionary leaders, Mao believed that opposition represented a threat not only to his government, but to the revolution itself. Political campaigns soon began targeting perceived enemies: landowners, former officials, business leaders, intellectuals, anyone suspected of resisting communist policies. Public denunciations became common. Mass political meetings were organized. Citizens were encouraged to identify ideological enemies among their neighbors and co-workers. Fear became an increasingly powerful political tool. The atmosphere of revolutionary enthusiasm slowly evolved into something darker. The government was no longer simply asking for loyalty. It was demanding it. Throughout the 1950s, Mao expanded the Communist Party's influence into nearly every aspect of daily life: education, agriculture, industry, culture, politics. Everything increasingly revolved around the goals of the state. The Communist Party became more than a government. It became the center of society itself. Yet Mao wanted even more. He did not merely want to govern China. He wanted to transform it. And he believed that transformation could happen faster than experts, economists, or even his own advisors thought possible. That belief would soon lead to one of the most catastrophic decisions of the 20th century, a decision that began with enormous optimism. Posters appeared throughout the country. Workers were encouraged to increase production. Farmers were urged to embrace revolutionary change. Government officials promised unprecedented economic growth. China, Mao declared, would leap forward, not gradually, not over decades, but almost overnight. The campaign became known as the Great Leap Forward. Its goal was astonishingly ambitious. China would rapidly transform itself from a largely agricultural society into a powerful industrial nation capable of competing with the world's leading economies. To many supporters, it sounded inspiring. To many experts, it sounded impossible. But inside Mao's China, Questioning such policies became increasingly dangerous. Officials learned quickly that reporting problems could be interpreted as political disloyalty. As a result, local leaders often exaggerated successes. Production numbers were inflated. Agricultural yields were overstated. Reports sent to Beijing painted a picture of extraordinary achievement. Mao saw what appeared to be evidence that his vision was working. In reality, disaster was already beginning, and the true consequences would soon become impossible to hide. If you're interested in Cold War stories like this, consider subscribing as we continue exploring the hidden events that shaped the modern world. Because what happened next would affect hundreds of millions of people and would become one of the darkest chapters in 20th century history. The Great Leap Forward began with extraordinary promises. Mao envisioned a China that would rapidly surpass its rivals through sheer revolutionary energy. Farms were reorganized into massive collective communes. Private ownership was reduced or eliminated. Millions of citizens were mobilized into ambitious state-directed projects. The message was clear. The future could be built through determination alone. Across the country, giant propaganda campaigns celebrated record harvests and unprecedented economic achievements. Newspapers reported miraculous successes. Local officials competed to demonstrate their loyalty by announcing ever higher production figures. But many of those figures were fiction. Farmers often knew the truth. Local administrators frequently knew the truth. Even some party officials understood that reality was far different from the reports reaching Beijing. Yet few were willing to challenge the narrative. The political atmosphere Mao had created rewarded optimism and punished criticism. Officials who questioned policy risked being labeled opponents of the revolution. As a result, bad news moved slowly. Good news, whether true or not, moved quickly. The consequences became devastating. Agricultural policies disrupted traditional farming methods. Labor was diverted away from food production. Entire communities were ordered to participate in massive industrial projects that often produced little practical value. One of the most famous examples involved backyard steel furnaces. Citizens were encouraged to melt household items and tools to increase steel production. Pots, pans, farming equipment, and other useful metal objects were sacrificed in the effort. The result was often low-quality metal that could not be used effectively. Meanwhile, agricultural output continued to suffer. Yet official reports claimed exactly the opposite. Because harvest numbers were exaggerated, government authorities collected grain quotas based on fictional production levels. Food that did not truly exist on paper was expected to exist in reality. And when those quotas were enforced, rural communities were left with dangerously little to eat. The famine that followed became one of the worst in human history. Entire villages struggled to survive. Families exhausted every available source of food. Reports emerged of desperate measures that would have been unimaginable only a few years earlier. Yet in many regions, local officials continued reporting success. Fear distorted reality. The system had become trapped by its own propaganda. The tragedy unfolded across vast portions of China. Millions suffered. Millions died. Even today, historians continue debating exact numbers, but there is broad agreement that the human cost was enormous, reaching into the tens of millions. The scale was difficult for outside observers to understand. China remained largely closed to the world. Foreign journalists had limited access. Independent verification was nearly impossible. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies worked tirelessly to piece together information from scattered reports, refugee accounts, diplomatic observations, and satellite imagery as technology improved. American analysts gradually began recognizing the magnitude of what was happening. The picture that emerged was deeply troubling. This was not merely an economic setback. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. Yet Mao initially resisted accepting responsibility. He had built a political system in which disagreement was dangerous. As a result, accurate information often struggled to reach the very top. The consequences of that dynamic became increasingly clear as the crisis deepened. Eventually, some Communist Party leaders began questioning the direction of policy. Quiet criticism emerged within the government itself. Certain officials pushed for practical reforms to stabilize food production and prevent further disaster. For a brief period, it appeared that Mao's influence might be weakening. But Mao was not prepared to surrender authority. The setbacks of the Great Leap Forward had damaged his reputation, yet he remained determined to shape China's future. And in the years ahead, he would launch another campaign, one even more chaotic, one that would turn students against teachers, neighbors against neighbors, and citizens against the institutions that governed their daily lives. The Great Leap Forward had revealed the dangers of unchecked power. The next chapter would reveal what happened when that power was used to unleash political revolution against an entire society. By the mid-1960s, Mao Zedong faced a problem. The disaster of the Great Leap Forward had weakened his standing inside the Communist Party, while he remained China's most powerful political figure. Other leaders had begun taking a greater role in managing the country's economy and government. To many observers, China appeared to be moving toward a more pragmatic path. Mao saw something different. He believed revolutionary spirit was fading. He feared that party officials were becoming too moderate, too bureaucratic, and insufficiently committed to communist ideology. In his view, the revolution itself was under threat. His response would change China once again. In 1966, Mao launched what became known as the Cultural Revolution. Officially, it was presented as a campaign to protect socialism and eliminate ideological enemies. In practice, it unleashed years of political chaos. Millions of young people answered Mao's call. Known as the Red Guards, they were encouraged to challenge authority, expose supposed enemies of the revolution, and defend Mao's vision of communism. Suddenly, teachers, professors, government officials, intellectuals, and even longtime Communist Party members found themselves under suspicion. Schools and universities became centers of political activism. Students publicly denounced educators. Historical artifacts were destroyed. Books, artworks, religious sites, and cultural treasures that had survived for centuries became targets. Anything associated with the old China was viewed as a potential threat. The movement quickly spiraled beyond anyone's control. Public humiliation became a common weapon. Individuals accused of political disloyalty were often forced to stand before large crowds and confess imagined crimes. Many were beaten, many were imprisoned, others disappeared into labor camps. Even high-ranking officials who had once stood beside Mao found themselves targeted. Loyalty offered no guarantee of safety. The rules could change overnight. Families were torn apart as political accusations spread from workplaces into homes. Children were encouraged to criticize parents. Friends became informants. Trust became increasingly difficult. The fear that had existed during earlier campaigns now reached nearly every corner of society. For ordinary citizens, survival often depended on remaining politically invisible. Meanwhile, government institutions struggled to function. The education system was severely disrupted. Economic productivity suffered. Political factions battled one another while claiming to represent Mao's true vision. Entire regions descended into instability. What began as a political campaign evolved into a nationwide upheaval. From abroad, the situation appeared alarming. American intelligence agencies monitored developments closely during the Cold War. Understanding China's internal condition was strategically important. The United States faced not only the Soviet Union, but also a revolutionary China that possessed growing military capabilities and significant regional influence. Yet the Cultural Revolution revealed something unexpected. Despite its immense size and power, Communist China was experiencing profound internal turmoil. The image of a perfectly unified revolutionary state did not match reality. Behind official propaganda stood a nation struggling with political upheaval on an enormous scale. Ironically, the chaos also contributed to growing tensions between China and the Soviet Union. Although both nations were communist, their relationship had deteriorated dramatically. Mao increasingly viewed Soviet leaders as ideological rivals rather than partners. Disputes over strategy, leadership, and communist doctrine widened the divide. By the late 1960s, clashes between Chinese and Soviet forces occurred along their shared border. The communist world itself had fractured. For American policymakers, this development created new opportunities. The rivalry between Beijing and Moscow altered the strategic landscape of the Cold War. A communist alliance that once appeared monolithic was now deeply divided. But inside China, millions continued living through the consequences of Mao's political campaigns. Years of uncertainty, fear, and disruption had transformed society. The Cultural Revolution was intended to strengthen Mao's vision. Instead, it left deep scars that would last long after the movement itself ended. And as the 1970s approached, a critical question emerged. What would happen when the man who had dominated China for decades was finally gone? The answer would reshape not only China, but the future balance of power in the Cold War itself. When Mao Zedong died in 1976, he had ruled China for nearly 3 decades. Few leaders in modern history had exercised such enormous influence over so many people for so long. He had helped unify a fractured nation. He had transformed China's political system. He had made China a major force in global affairs. But his legacy was inseparable from the immense human cost of his rule. The Great Leap Forward had produced one of the deadliest famines in history. The Cultural Revolution had shattered lives, disrupted institutions, and created years of political chaos. Millions suffered through campaigns launched in the name of revolutionary progress. Millions more lived under a system where fear often replaced open debate and political loyalty became a requirement for survival. After Mao's death, China's leadership faced a difficult reality. The country could not continue indefinitely on the same path. Gradually, many of Mao's most radical policies were abandoned. Economic reforms began. Agricultural restrictions were eased. Markets slowly reappeared. Foreign investment was encouraged. China remained under Communist Party control, but its leaders increasingly embraced practical solutions rather than permanent revolution. The transformation was remarkable. Within a generation, China emerged as one of the world's largest economies. Yet the memory of Mao's era remained complex. To some, he remained the founder of modern China. To others, he was a warning about the dangers of unchecked political power. His legacy continues to spark debate both inside and outside China. For the United States, Mao's rule represented one of the most significant challenges of the Cold War. American policymakers had to navigate a world in which Communist China was both a powerful rival and, at times, the strategic counterweight to the Soviet Union. Understanding China's internal struggles became an important part of broader Cold War strategy. The story of Mao's rule ultimately reveals a larger lesson. Nations are not shaped by ideology alone. They are shaped by the decisions of leaders, the institutions that constrain power, and the willingness of societies to confront reality even when the truth is uncomfortable. When criticism becomes impossible, mistakes become harder to correct. When fear replaces honest debate, bad decisions can grow into national disasters. The dark side of Mao's rule was not simply the result of one policy or one campaign. It was a result of a system in which enormous power became concentrated in the hands of a single leader whose vision could rarely be challenged. And that may be the most enduring lesson of all. The Cold War was filled with military standoffs, nuclear crises, and ideological confrontations. But some of its most important stories unfolded far from the battlefield, affecting millions of ordinary people whose lives were shaped by decisions made at the highest levels of power. The story of Mao Zedong is one of those stories. A story of revolution and ambition. A story of transformation and tragedy. And a reminder that the consequences of political power can echo across generations. For more Cold War stories, hidden history, and events that shaped the modern world, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and support the channel.